She was under contract to write a coffee table book on her way to Everest Base Camp called Summits of My Soul. It was a memoir, sort of travelogue scrapbook for San Francisco's Chronicle Books. And she was planning a rendezvous before her attempt on the summit with none other than Martha Stewart. By the time the now defunct New York Observer came out with the article entitled Sandy Pittman Social Climbs Mount Everest, a few weeks later, Stewart had pulled out of the Nepal trip. The most embarrassing line in the piece came from Pittman herself, where she was quoted as saying, "I wouldn't dream of leaving town without an ample supply of Dean and DeLuca's Near East blend and my espresso maker." Sandy Pittman, a divisive figure. Many believe that she was the reason that so many people lost their lives on that fateful day in 1996, the tragic storm made famous in John Krakauer's book, Into Thin Air. We're going to talk today about Sandy Pittman and why she was so divisive, why people seem to think that she's the one to blame. Certainly, Sandy Pittman appears to be her own worst enemy in what became an absolute mess in the media after people died on the south side and then 3 others on the north side, but that was a whole different story itself. Today, I'd like to break down a little bit about Sandy Pittman and why it appears she's being pitted against the world as the real devil, as the demon, as the person responsible for so many deaths. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not an analyst, I don't have the professional ability to go into detail about personality traits that might make people dislike her, but for some reason, it does appear, and we'll point this out in the video, that she is her own worst enemy through some of the actions that took place not only during the storm of 1996, but immediately after and in the years following, leading up to this very day. Before I go any further on this video, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe and also consider becoming a member of this channel. You can support the work that I do on Everest Mystery so I can put out more videos like this. These videos I look to inspire and give you thought-provoking videos that make your life just a little bit better. Sandy Pittman. It was her 3rd attempt on Mount Everest. She was a client of Scott Fischer, the well-known guide who owned Mountain Madness. In the controversy afterward, she never mentioned having been short-roped up the mountain by Sherpa Lopsang. She never mentioned that she was carried out of the blizzard by Anatoly Bokriev. She never talked about the assistance of Neil Beidelman on the way down. And in a big no-no, she hooked up with somebody 15 years her junior, a snowboarder, 26 years old, on the mountain, which is a big no-no today, but back then even had a more divisive impact. It's pretty interesting to note that while I was researching this video, and I did a lot of it, I watched a lot of videos, I read a lot of articles, it was almost impossible to find anything from Sandy Pittman herself. It's almost as if it's mysteriously disappeared. So the question is, why has so much information about Sandy Pittman, Sandy Hill, disappeared? It's really hard to find it. And as it would turn out, what I came across was an interview she did after having given a talk in Turkey. She did a keynote presentation, and the thing that really struck me is she never said any names. And probably more shocking to me was that when she talked about the devastating tragedy of 1996, now remember, she was a client of Scott Fischer's, she said, "Nobody on our team died." And I waited, and I waited. It was a pregnant pause. She never mentioned Scott Fischer, and certainly never mentioned him by name. The only person in the interview that she said by name was Anatoly Bokriev, who passed away about a year and some months later in an avalanche on Annapurna. And so it was strange to me that no names were used. She referred to whom I am assuming is Jon Krakauer as a writer who wrote a book that told many lies. And the lies that she referred to had to do with a coffee espresso maker, but not about the being short roped up to the top of the mountain. Who cares about the coffee maker? Now we are more used to some of the modern conveniences on a mountain, and as a big coffee guy myself, I probably would have tried to become friends with her to get some cappuccino. So honestly, I have no problem with a cappuccino maker being at base camp. So that is the thing that discredits Jon Krakauer for supposedly lying, and I'm not making a claim either way. Who cares about the cappuccino maker? Recently, I did a video about Scott Fischer and his culpability in what took place along with Rob Hall during the tragedy of 1996. And I'll put a link to that video in the description of this video so you can take a look at it. I'm not intending to necessarily break down a play-by-play scenario of what took place with Sandy Pittman, but what I want to do is give a general overview of what took place on the mountain, and more importantly, how she handled the criticism and what I think, and I'll share this toward the end of the video, what I think her main problem is, if you will. And so stay tuned for that at the end. Sandy Pittman, she had a lot on the line, and as was stated at the beginning of the video, she had a contract for a book, and the book was essentially about her climbing the 7 summits, the highest point on all the continents of planet Earth. So were she to come home without summiting Everest, that would make it kind of a weak book, given that Everest is the big one, right? She ultimately did reach the summit at 2:30 p.m. on May 10th, and reportedly, she was short-roped by Sherpa Lopsang for 4 or 5 hours, which ultimately created a lot of the backlog and one of the traffic jams that took place, because Lopsang was supposed to be one of the Sherpas to set up the fixed ropes through the difficult sections of the mountain, namely the Hillary Step and certain sections along the Cornice Ridge. In a Vanity Fair article called Snowblind Ambition, she seemed like she was a sure bet. You can understand why Scott Fischer had an interest in her, because she was going to give his team, the Mountain Madness team, a lot of publicity, and the competition between Rob Hall and Scott Fischer for top dog, if you will, on Mount Everest was on, because Jon Krakauer was with the Rob Hall Expedition Adventure Consultants. Now, one thing of note that I find fascinating is Jon Krakauer had originally been assigned to go with the Scott Fischer Mountain Madness team, and then Outside Magazine went to Rob Hall and said, can you give us a better price? And so the deal is that Rob Hall said, yes, absolutely. Krakauer was moved from Mountain Madness over to Adventure Consultants, at which time Scott Fischer ramped up to 11 on the volume dial, the idea of Sandy Pittman bringing her high-profile deal, if you will, to Mount Everest, reporting to NBC News and writing blog posts, having a satellite telephone. It was game on all the way. This was a competition, let's be honest, between two mountain guides who were very, very ambitious. So on May 10th, Sandy Pittman pulls herself up onto the summit of Mount Everest. It was already after the turnaround time. Neil Beidelman was jubilant to have seen her make it to the summit. They were very happy. They took some photographs. Pittman has reported to have said that when she looked out for the view, she could see the curvature of the earth. It's an amazing place to be, and they were all very, very happy. And the crazy thing is nobody was aware that a storm was barreling in on the mountain, and it was about to hit them really hard, and everybody's worlds were about to change in a big way, and lives were about to be lost. But as they say in fable, fiction, and reality, reaching the summit is only halfway. You have to get back down alive and safely for it to count. And a high percentage of accidents and deaths take place on the way down. Not necessarily on the way down from the summit, but after a person turns to make his or her descent. Vanity Fair article reports that Pittman fatigued badly on the way down, and Charlotte Fox, who was an experienced climber who had brought along her boyfriend and fellow Snowmass Ski Patrol member Tim Madsen, they were keeping an eye out for her, if you will, focused on trying to help her. And at the notorious and famous Hillary Step, that 40-foot or 12-meter section that is very, very steep, Pittman's crampons tangled up into the rope. And if you tangle your crampons up there when you're tired and completely spent, that is an awful thing to have happen. It has literally been the difference between life and death at the Hillary Step for someone to get in trouble up there. A little further along, after the Cornice Ridge of Everest, is a spot called the South Summit. And at that time, Pittman was beyond exhaustion, laying on her stomach. And of all things, Charlotte Fox had a shot of dexamethasone, which is a drug that you only shoot into your body when you're truly desperate, life or death kind of thing. And so she took this shot of Dex and stabbed it through her downsuit into her butt and injected her with the Dex and the drug, and it had a miraculous and instantaneous effect and gave Pittman the energy to get up and keep on moving. Let's fast forward to about 3 a.m. Charlotte Fox recalls that Pittman had completely given up and she just wanted to be left there to die. It wasn't long after that that Anatoly Bokriev found that group huddled not too far from Camp 4, the high camp on Mount Everest at 8,000 meters. Now we're talking still in the death zone, and the winds are roaring like a freight train or a Boeing 747 engine, and the visibility is almost zero given that it's dark, one, but there's so much snow falling. And so Bokriev then dragged or carried Pittman back to camp, where she was recuperated with a cup of hot chocolate, reportedly having had hallucinations that she was in a tea house being served hot tea. So it's understandable to know that the human mind and body is under such duress that almost anything could happen, and you have to understand some people are able to perform well up there and others are not. And clearly Pittman was at the edge of her ability, both mentally and physically. How she performed physically and mentally, reportedly being hysterical up there, wanting to die, and being almost inconsolable up there, is totally understandable. And I think what happens is we start to see the problems with Sandy Pittman happen a little bit afterward, where she gets back to Kathmandu and at the Yak and Yeti Hotel, which is a really cool hotel where a lot of people stay before and after expeditions. And she remarked giddily, "Can you believe Oprah Winfrey called me?" And people are like, I mean, that is kind of cool, don't get me wrong, but you just lost your main guide, and 7 other people on the mountain had died along with him. There should be no joy in getting a phone call from Oprah Winfrey. And so on that following Monday, the team from Fischer's Mountain Madness team decided that they were going to meet at the Yak and Yeti Garden, which is outside this beautiful area behind the hotel, and they were going to pose for a group picture. And as it says in the article in Vanity Fair, Pittman, who had originally refused to pose for Vanity Fair, saying she didn't want to do anything to make her stand out from the group, arrived in makeup with a tight black mini skirt, a black blouse, mandarin collar, elaborate Tibetan headdress, and the other climbers, most of them casually dressed, were taken aback. I can imagine the shock. And so this is the ultimate kicker. Afterward, in an interview with NBC and a lengthy background session with Newsweek the day before, Sandy Pittman, she never mentioned that she had been in serious jeopardy at all. Never mentioned the short rope, never mentioned that she would have died had she not been helped by Beidelman and Bokriev. This is the one where I think the stake is driven into the heart of giving a second chance, that she said in a subsequent telephone conversation when asked about her lack of appreciation, if you will, toward the two gentlemen who had saved her life. Pittman responded, quote, "Which two gentlemen is that?" That's pretty hardcore. In that situation, I start to see there's this personality trait, kind of a disorder thing happening where she's unable to look beyond herself and her image and see that people are probably hating her at this time. That just owning your own crap is one of the most incredible qualities in a human being. To say, yeah, I was naive, or I screwed up, I made a huge mistake. But we start to see that this goes even farther and farther, and people start to build a big dislike for her. And Pittman continued to maintain that there were no heroes that night, that the guides were just doing their jobs. Absolutely mind-boggling, right? No, if you do your job, yes, that is the right thing. But when you do your job and you do it well, you are to be commended for it. And they literally saved her life. She refused to acknowledge that. That's a weak point right there. To go into a great deal of minutia about what took place on the mountain would really be besides the point. It's very well known that Sandy Pittman struggled desperately up on the mountain during the storm of May 10th and 11th, and that without the assistance of Neil Beidelman, Anatoly Bokriev, Charlotte Fox, and some of the others around her, she certainly would have died. But is she the one responsible for the other deaths on the mountain? And so after they get back down on the mountain, she shows up to the photo session in the garden at the Yak and Yeti Hotel wearing this ostentatious costume, and the other climbers on her team are shocked, and she is not picking up, somehow not able to perceive that this is a problem with the other people. And maybe that's a personality defect of its own, but somehow, some way, she continued going with the story that there was no blame on the mountain, that the mountain was in control. Nature is what nature is, she said. And the mystery in the interview from 2023 is what draws us. But most climbers who are alive climb because of how small it makes you feel, how insignificant. However, during many of her actions after the expedition back in Kathmamdu and in the United States after she returned, she wasn't acting insignificant and small. She spent such a great deal of her effort saving face. And so we return to the question that I asked at the beginning: why is so much of her reporting from the mountain impossible to find online? We do know that she hired a very well-known attorney who was going to every effort possible to help Sandy Pittman, if you will, control the curve of what was happening. And she was clearly fearful that she was going to lose everything. Now, just a little bit of a side note about Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. I read the book, and it's probably not a surprise to any of you that I actually really loved the book. I felt that Jon Krakauer's honesty, at least being self-deprecating in some standpoints, showing his own weaknesses, but being brutally honest about his opinions of others, is so refreshing. Krakauer, in his defense, was speaking his truth of what took place on the mountain. Personally, I could give a crap if she had a cappuccino maker or not, but I think the short roping and the story about how that changed Lopsang's efforts during the day is very, very important. But is it Sandy Pittman's fault? I really don't think so. I think ultimately the blame falls upon the people who gave her that opportunity to be on the mountain. So when you take a look at Scott Fischer bringing her on to the Mountain Madness team, you think, not that Scott Fischer should be charged in some crime. That would be a ludicrous idea, but it would be like taking a set of car keys and handing it to an 11 or 12-year-old kid who can't even reach the gas pedal with his or her foot, and when that kid gets in a car accident, blaming the kid. You just can't do that. It's Uncle Joe who gave the kid the keys in the first place. And so Sandy Pittman was put in a place of being empowered with this great opportunity to climb Everest, to finish publishing her book, and being encouraged to do so, sending live dispatches to NBC News. The one thing that stood out about this interview of Sandy Pittman is it was posed in a way that made her look like a victim, like she was a completely blameless person in the entire situation that ensued. She talked about seeing a Freudian analyst, and the Freudian analyst even went so far as to suggest if you had summited Everest on the first or second try, perhaps your husband wouldn't have left you. And that's just ridiculous stuff. But it points out that idea, I'm a victim, I've been treated unkindly and unfairly by the public, but the truth is she started digging her own grave and laying the foundation for being somebody who did not want to take any responsibility for anything that took place on the mountain that time. If I were to make one suggestion, if I had an opportunity to speak to her in person, I'd say, all you have to do is call up Neil Beidelman and say, thank you. Without you, I'd be dead right now. I appreciate you. I was weak. I lost my mind. I was freaking out. I didn't want to die. Without somebody like you, Anatoly, Charlotte Fox, both of those two people are not alive any longer. I would be dead. This 1996 disaster gives us an opportunity to look at so many facets of a personality. What drives a person to save face, or what drives a person to save another person's life. And Sandy Pittman is such an interesting story because we can almost find ourselves caught in that bind. No, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. And then the world just piling on her saying, you are wrong, you are a bad person. That's got to be a tough thing, especially if one might consider that she just doesn't really quite get it, can't quite turn the corner to understand what are all these people talking about. We're all different. We all have faults. We all have things that we're good at and bad at. And so in this case of Sandy Pittman, we ask, does she deserve any blame for people losing their lives? To an extent, perhaps there are some elements of it at the time when she was up there, but ultimately the spotlight should be shined on the guides who gave her and the others on the mountain that time the opportunity to go climb and not be turned around when it was very obvious that she did not have the strength to go on any further. That's where the blame lies, whether that would be Lopsang, who also lost his life within a year after that disaster, Scott Fischer, and guides like Rob Hall. I would love to know what you think about this. Leave some of your thoughts or questions, or to point out things that I might have gotten incorrectly in the comments. Get the discussion going. I really do want to know. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time a video comes out, and take a moment to do somebody a favor and don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one step at a time. Thanks for being here.